Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. We're back. I was a little bit ill the last week. I'm getting better. We're back, so we'll start talking about Ukraine. We'll also talk about Taiwan and the situation here in Asia, because it's all connected. And I think you will see how it is all connected as we go through a little bit of an update. Also, in the comment section, if you have any questions, just ask them. And if I see an appropriate question that kind of links into what we're talking about, I'll put it up on the screen. We can talk about that also. Angelo, how are you doing? What is your take on, say, the last week, the situation in Ukraine? Let's start there.
Just a few things. I would say what struck me the most was the move of Lithuania cutting Kaliningrad from Russia. The connection, there's a corridor between Kaliningrad and the mainland of Russia, and cutting that reminds me of one thing. I don't know if you remember, the Gdansk corridor was this land they were populated by Germans, and this was actually the reason that we had the start of World War II. Because Poland denied the access, the link to Gdansk. And actually what happened is that, they say, well, if you don't do that, we are going to attack you. And what Poland did back then was, they were talking to actually England, the UK. And the UK said, oh, we got you back. So that is very interesting. It reminds me a little bit of what is happening in Ukraine. You have Macron, you have Draghi, they're trying to push Zelensky to make concessions and to sit down, while you have Boris Johnson going there, just making sure that there's no agreement. He wants war. So you see this shift within Europe. So it is interesting. We are actually there's a replica. There are many similarities to World War II, and actually I would go as further that what is happening now. Many people they say. There's World War I, World War II, World War III. Actually, it's all a continuation. What we are seeing here right now, it is a continuation of World War II. The wish of the West, the collective West, was actually just, to kill many birds with one stone. If they could actually destroy Germany and destroy the USSR at the same time. They didn't manage to destroy the USSR. Even though before the World War II, actually the USSR was more of an enemy than Hitler for the West. So what they want to do now is actually completely destroy Russia. Why? Because, well, it's about the global hegemony, and the last piece is China. So it's one piece before getting to the main goal of China. Once Russia and China are taken, that's over. There's a new global order, and it's not going to be very democratic. It's going to be the big oligarch, the big corporations, and it's going to be an illusion of democracy.
Okay, let me see if I can. Angelo, can you try talking a little bit more? We're gonna try to fix the audio levels. If Angelo's audio is a little bit better, please let me know in the comment section.
Yes,
I just raised your audio level on my side. Let's see if that works. Okay. Yeah, so Kaliningrad is right here on the map. This is the rest of Russia. And then they have Kaliningrad here, which is separated by Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus. No problems getting through Belarus, but the main problem is Lithuania here. And so I was talking to Angelo about this before we started live here. And I was saying, we're going to see the West do a lot of not necessarily directly related things, but things to push Russia's buttons, because they cannot change what's going on the ground in Ukraine. The proxy war against Russia and Ukraine is falling apart for the West, so they're going to lash out indirectly in other ways, things they feel they can do. Kaliningrad, trying to cut Kaliningrad off. This is mostly a civilian population. These will be ordinary people that suffer. And this is the West demonstrating to the world, all of this talk about underwriting freedom and democracy and human rights, it's all a smokescreen. They will hurt ordinary people if and when it is convenient. And so right now it's very convenient for the West to target the civilian population of Kaliningrad because they're frustrated with the situation on the ground in Ukraine. I don't want to open the live map because sometimes it freezes everything on my side. But let's talk a little bit about what's going on. The fighting is still in the Donbas region, the northern Donbas region, and Ukraine is still losing. They're losing 100, 200 dead a day, hundreds injured. It could be up to 1,000 a day. Total, totally removed from the battle one way or the other. And we'll see headlines like this. Ukraine latest updates, German heavy weapons arrive in Ukraine. And it's like eight of these, let's see if we could get a picture of it. 8 of these self-propelled artillery pieces. That's not going to make any difference on the battlefield. Just this week, I saw another video of M777 howitzers being found and destroyed by Russian forces in Ukraine. That's what's going to happen to all of these heavy weapon systems the West is sending in these very small amounts, little by little. They show up on the battlefield, they get wiped off the battlefield. And I want to remind people that these are capabilities Ukraine had at the beginning of this conflict. At the end of February, they had their own self-propelled artillery. It got destroyed by Russia. Now they're asking for foreign systems, and they will also get destroyed. It's actually much worse for Ukraine because these are new systems that they're not familiar with. Their logistical system's not set up to handle them. So it's actually going to diminish their capabilities, even if the West could send enough to replace their losses, which at this point they're not. Angelo, you have anything you want to say about that? I'm going to talk about these drones next.
I just want to add, related to the new supply of those weapons. First of all, like you mentioned quite a few times, you need to train people. Another thing is that what the quantities we are talking about, it's nowhere near to what Ukraine needs. Actually, there's, every day there are much more weapons being destroyed than the ones that are arriving. And then if you look at actually the $50 billion bill from the US, this is all money recycling. It's for the MIC. And actually, when you look at where the money is going, it's going to NGOs, it's going to training. And Rand Paul asked for, accountability. Just to be able just to check what is, the spending. So we wouldn't go into this money recycling we had for 20 years in Afghanistan. How much in Afghanistan? 1 to trillion was spent, and we don't know where the money went. That's the same that is going to happen in Ukraine. The amount that is directly related to weapons is $6 billion. And when you look at the $6 billion, it's all weapons that probably the US doesn't need. And it's just a money laundering scheme. So I don't think it's a game changer. Some people actually mention a game changer. I did believe when I saw the figure, I was like, well, 50 billion is going to change the game. It's not. It's another money recycling to make the elites, the MIC, military industrial complex, richer. And this is coming actually at the worst time. Look at the European and US economy. It's the worst time. They just pouring $50 billion. Imagine that money if it was to go into economy infrastructure. That is just disgusting. And what is more disgusting is, they're fighting with the Ukrainian blood, and they claim they care about Ukrainians. They don't. And I'm telling you, Taiwanese, just look at what is happening to Ukraine. Don't do the same mistake. And I think this is a topic we need to go back. A lot. It's Taiwan, and Taiwan is way bigger.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about Taiwan today. I just want to help flesh out just how bad the situation is in Ukraine first, so that when we talk about Taiwan, people understand where if the people there don't wake up and take their country back, by that I mean you're a territory of China. You need to take back this from the people hijacking it and trying to turn it into this independence experiment or whatever it is that they're trying to do. just wait. There's some real doozies this week that came out in the news about Taiwan. I had done a video about the Gray Eagle drones, and I said they're going to end up just like the Bayraktar TB2 drones from Turkey. They're going to get shot out of the air. Russia has the best air defense systems in the world. That's even according to the United States. When they send these Gray Eagle drones to Ukraine to be used, they're going to be shot straight out of the sky. And now the US is so worried that this is actually what's going to happen that I'm not really sure they're going to send them or not. It says it's not Afghanistan. Ukrainian pilots push back on US-provided drones. Both the Biden administration and Ukraine are worried that American strike drones would get shot down quickly. Absolutely, yes, that is exactly what would happen. I remember when I put the videos out about the Bayraktar and also the Gray Eagle drones, when they were first talking about this, people in the comment section were saying, Brian, that's Russian propaganda. Of course it's going to help them. Don't you remember the Battle of Kiev? And I said, no, they're going to get shot down. They are getting shot down. They will be shot down. And now that is exactly what the foreign policy article here is talking about. You have all of these Ukrainian pilots who don't have jets because, again, their whole air force was taken away from them. And so now they can just sit around and do interviews with foreign policy in the middle of a war. And they're saying that these Gray Eagles, they're all going to get lost. There's nothing they can use them for. And this is the problem that Ukraine has. It's not just a lack of weapons. It's the fact that even the weapons that could be sent, like these Gray Eagle drones, they're not going to make any difference on the battlefield. Russia's military is bigger, it's better equipped. They have more of everything in terms of air defense. They have the best. The irony is that Russia does not have air superiority over all of Ukraine, specifically because Ukraine has Russian-designed air defense systems in their arsenal. That is the irony there. But Russia, wherever they decide to set up their layered air defense systems, nothing is getting through, not the Bayraktar TB2 and not any drone from the United States. It's just a fact, and now even the Western media is admitting it. So there's that. We just talked about this. There was M109, I think, is the U.S. equivalent of the self-propelled howitzer. Entire batteries of these have been destroyed in Ukraine, relatively recent. Here they're talking about, this is what CNN and some others are still doing in the Western media. Severodonetsk is where all of the fighting is taking place right now. Severodonetsk and then Lysychansk, these two cities, about 100,000 and about 93 to 95,000. That was the population before the fighting started. The reason the fighting is taking so long is because the nature of the warfare. It is heavily dug in defenses that Ukraine has built up over the course of 8 years, plus they're in cities which are notoriously hard to take. If you're the attacker, it's very hard to take an urban area. So it takes time. It could take a month, it could take 2 months. Fallujah in Iraq was much smaller than, say, Mariupol. And it took the US almost the same amount of time it took Russia to take Mariupol. So Russia is able to take these cities. They're able to take it in a reasonable amount of time. When the West says, 2 months on, Russia is still struggling to capture this small Ukrainian city, compared to what? Show me an example of the US doing a similar military operation and how long did it take them? You can't, because there is nothing to compare it to. Russia, its operation in Ukraine is unique. The US has not fought a country like Ukraine with the population as big as Ukraine, geographically as large as Ukraine, and a military as prepared and well-trained as Ukraine's military. It has never done it, not in modern history. So what Russia is doing, you have to think of a point of reference, and there is none. You cannot compare it to anything. What they're doing is actually quite amazing in terms of military operations. They're actually doing a pretty good job considering the situation, considering that they have a peacetime military that they're using to do this. Let me see.
Yeah, can I one thing,
Go ahead.
Brian? It's important just to keep on repeating, this is a special operation. This is not war. This is extremely important. So the goal here is to protect civilian population. Why is it taking so much time in Severodonetsk? Severodonetsk, now it's over. The militaries, Ukrainian militaries are hiding into a factory, a bit like similar to what they did in Mariupol. So there's probably 1,000, 2,000 hiding in a factory. But they're taking civilian hostages. Addition to that, why is it taking so much time in general to take cities like this, like in Mariupol, same? Because they're using civilians as human shields, which is illegal under international laws. So they're forcing people to stay in their home, and actually they're putting snipers into habitations. They are putting army personnel into schools, into hospitals. How cowards is that? It's the first army in history, especially when it was in Donbass, that is hiding behind civilians. They're putting civilians on front. Whoever did that? Nobody in world history did that. Why did they do this in Donbass? Because they hate the population is Russian. They hate Russians, and they wanted to put Russians in front of them and fight behind them.
Absolutely. And this isn't just Angelo making this up. This article, I've shown this many times. Washington Post, Ukraine's strategy of placing heavy military equipment and other fortifications in civilian zones could weaken Western Ukrainian efforts to hold Russia legally culpable for possible war crimes, said human rights activists and international humanitarian law experts. Let's see. Over the past month, Washington Post journalists have witnessed Ukrainian anti-tank rockets, anti-aircraft guns, and armored personnel carriers placed near apartment buildings. This is exactly what you're talking about, Angelo. They're putting their military in and among the civilian population. They refuse to evacuate the civilian population. Just like in Mariupol, they've got these civilians in with them in these industrial zones where they're hiding from Russia and pretending that the city is still being contested. So that is definitely a real problem. Also, this question I've got up on the screen, is Russia getting tired of US planes and ships and intel assets constantly scanning Russian radar and tipping off Ukraine to kill Russian generals and soldiers? So I don't know how much the U.S. doing this has played into killing Russian generals. That number is highly inflated. That is, part of the war propaganda. But I will say that there are a lot of things that the U.S. is doing to try to provoke Russia, including cutting off Kaliningrad, trying to cut off Kaliningrad. This is something that the U.S. and its allies did all throughout the conflict in Syria. When Russia intervened at the request of the Syrian government, the U.S. and its allies repeatedly tried to provoke Russia into a wider conflict. Russia focused like a laser on its main objective, which was protecting Syria, restoring Syrian control over the major population centers, fighting the long fight, and avoiding these short-term political pitfalls that the U.S. set out. So say when Turkey shot down a Russian warplane and ambushed the rescue team that came to try to rescue the pilot, a lot of people said, why doesn't Russia do something to Turkey? Why don't they retaliate? Why don't they make an example out of Ankara? And it's because Russia realizes that Turkey is a whole country. Beyond just the political leadership, the military leadership, that leadership will change over time. Turkey is always going to be an important country with tons and tons of people that Russia wants to work with in the future. So they're not going to burn bridges. They're going to be patient and focus on the best type of revenge, which is ultimately winning the conflict. This is the exact same mindset Russia has in terms of Ukraine. So in addition to Kaliningrad, in addition to, I think people have seen the attacks on Donetsk city, Ukrainian artillery shelling the civilian population of Donetsk city. They're trying to provoke Russia. They're trying to get Russia to change the way it's fighting the war. Why? Because the way Russia is fighting the war is resulting in Russia winning. They want to change that. So Russia is not going to react to this. They will do what they can. They're not going to overall change the game plan to respond to this. There were also attacks on, I think it was a gas rig in the Black Sea. This is because Ukraine doesn't have anything that it can attack of military value that is significant, that will change anything. So they do these highly symbolic and provocative attacks on civilian. Someone was just talking about the oil platform. Stuff like this is not going to change the war in Ukraine's favor. It isn't. If Russia reacts to it, it could jeopardize Russia's victory in the end. So We're going to keep seeing these provocations. The provocations are a direct result of Russia winning and the West panicking and trying to change that calculus. Is there anything else, Angelo, you want to talk about in terms of Ukraine?
I think Zelensky, especially Zelensky, is fighting a war of communication. So it's all about, building some narratives, and he's willing actually to have huge losses just to build up a small story. I mean, we saw what he tried to do in Snake Island. I mean, those are why we sacrificing so many lives just because he needs the story, he needs something, he needs to prove the West that he's actually doing something significant, which is not. Is losing the war. I want to add that you just mentioned before, like generals, the generals, the Russian generals that were killed. Maybe some were killed, but I mean nowhere near what Zelensky is claiming. But I want to add one thing. I mean the way it works with Russian army, generals tend to be much younger, and they tend to be much more on the front. That's one of the characteristics of the Russian army. Much younger, probably 10 years younger than if it was a NATO military. So I think again, it's what Russia is focusing is on the ground, winning there. And I think what is very alarming here is that at the beginning, Russian had heavy casualties at the real beginning. You saw when they actually built up a few fronts, they were trying to pin down Ukrainian army, but actually cost a lot of soldiers' lives, Russian soldiers' lives. Now we are talking about 0 deaths on the Russian side, 0, while you have 1,000 casualties every single day on the Ukrainian side. So just count. If we keep that pace, we had already 100 days, probably 70,000 soldiers that are, that they either died or cannot operate or they were taken prisoners. If we go on this pace, another 100 days, is going to be close to 200,000 soldiers that they cannot fight anymore. It's over. It's over. And I think if Zelensky keep on going this way, I wouldn't be surprised that overnight there would be a coup there. Militaries won't accept. It's this is one of the prerequisites. It's one of the rights that army has. Is if you have, it's the last control. I mean, it's in terms of sovereignty, it should have been a responsibility actually from the army to take back the power. Sometimes when you have a coup, keep in mind that some coup can be constitutional, they can be legal. And I think at this point right now, because Ukraine has been hijacked since 2014, it would be extremely legitimate to have a coup now and to stop this bloodshed. Because it's very sad to have, using how cynical is that? I mean, not only from Zelensky, but from the West. Fighting to the last Ukrainian. How cynical is that? How much do you care about Ukrainians? Zero. They all know that. They all know that. But, it's all about virtue signaling, trying to portray yourself, the West, as being good versus the evil. No, it's extremely evil. Throwing all those young soldiers to be killed, to be killed every day, thousands of them.
Yeah, and what they're proposing, putting Ukraine on track to becoming an EU member, and who knows how many years. Again, it is all of these symbolic gestures that when you actually scratch a little under the surface, you realize mean absolutely nothing. Boris Johnson, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, going to Kiev, talking with President Zelensky, saying he's going to train 10,000 Ukrainian troops every 4 months when they're losing, 3 times that up per month. What good is that going to do? And it sounds like a lot to the untrained ear, people just reading headlines. But when you actually think about it, it's almost less than doing nothing, because it's setting Ukraine back. It's giving them false hope. It's encouraging the leadership in Kiev to continue fighting, despite, if their big goal is to try to preserve as much of their own territory as possible. They should be at the negotiation table right now. Every day that goes by, they lose more territory. and they're in a weaker position when they do finally go to negotiate. And nothing is going to change that. Nothing, no number of weapons that the West can send to Ukraine is going to change that. They have been sending weapons, has been making absolutely no difference. They're talking about I just did a video on the Minister of Foreign Affairs talking about, we have a plan for victory for Ukraine. All you have to do is give us an entire army and an entire air force worth of modern heavy weapons, and we will take those and we will go win the war, which is impossible. It cannot be done. It will not happen. And so basically he's saying there is no plan for victory. And you have to wonder, we could only speculate, why do they even say things like this? If you're in Moscow, you're listening to this, you're just thinking they have no plan. And so why are they saying it? Are they using this as an excuse to blame the West for not sending them these irrational requests for weapons? Oh, the U.S. didn't send 1,000 howitzers. That's why we didn't win. So it's their fault, not ours. We were going to fight, but we didn't get what we asked for. That's what they're asking for. They're asking for 1,000 howitzers, hundreds and hundreds of like HIMARS and M270s, rocket launchers. This is stuff that the West couldn't give them even if they wanted to. It's impossible. You just can't do it. And even if you could do it, you have to think, have you ever seen, like in history, the U.S. fighting against one of these developing countries, and in their army they had some impressive equipment, but the overall state of the army was pretty bad? That's because in modern warfare, you have to fight in a combined arms manner. You have to have your tanks, your jets, your soldiers. Everything has to be working in combination. And if all you have is like one unit of HIMARS and everything else is, they're not getting food or water, let alone ammunition, they cannot function in a cooperative manner on the battlefield. They will lose. They will be isolated and destroyed. That's what's happening in Ukraine right now. So it's important to, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing. It's actually militaries. I mean, what is going to be left in 2-3 months, 4 months time in Ukraine? Keep in mind that the strongest army was the Azov battalion, the most radical. They were willing to die, for their cause, nationalistic cause, far right, Nazi cause, call it what it is. The strongest are gone. They've been annihilated. Now, more and more what you are going to have is people that actually civilians that, they're not professionals, and they're being sent on the front, and it's going to be a massacre. I want to add one more thing. It's interesting that actually the EU and the US cannot send more for a single reason, that they don't have that. They would need to produce them. So what is happening right now is not only the Russia is actually demilitarization, is doing demilitarization of Ukraine, but also Europe. And what Europe is sending right now, the ammunition, there's a shelf life in the ammunitions. It's very old ammunitions that even actually they land, it lands and it doesn't explode because there's a shelf life, So, I don't know what is the percentage that don't explode, but this is what they're sending. So they're regarding Ukraine as, we have some junk. And that junk they're sending to Ukraine, it's not gift, it's not aid. This will be repaid. This is why you have a Lend-Lease agreement. It's a very smart way. I'll give you the junk. There's a Lend-Lease agreement, and where the money is coming from? It's going to be from the money they confiscated from Russia. So here they're going to split that money, and it's not going to benefit average people. It's going to be MIC. They find a solution. There's going to be hundreds of billions from Russia, and we are going to use it. But physically, what Ukraine is going to get, close to zero, is going to be all junk, all stuff that the West doesn't need.
Yeah, they're sending them all of these old weapon systems, or weapon systems that don't make sense on the modern battlefield anymore. So like the M777, for example, it's this extremely lightweight artillery piece that was meant for the U.S. to get up into the mountains in Afghanistan. They're not fighting that war anymore. They don't need this type of artillery piece anymore. So they're sending them to Ukraine. It makes no sense at all for Ukraine to have these and to be using them. They're making absolutely no difference on the battlefield. And then once they're all gone, the US will say, well, we need to replace it. So they'll find something to replace it with. So the one winner out of all of this is, yes, the military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, making all of this money, doing these backfill orders for the Stingers and the Javelin. And now you have all of these even heavier weapons that are being sent to Ukraine that are going to have to be replaced, not just in the U.S. but all across Europe. So it is a huge windfall of profits for arms manufacturers. That's about it now. Because we're talking about Ukraine and we keep hearing about Taiwan. Taiwan should take should look at how Ukraine is defending their country, and Taiwan should do this if China invades Taiwan. And I just want to lay a few things out here. First of all, Taiwan is not a country. Nobody recognizes it as a country. The government in Taiwan does not recognize it as a country. Yet their own constitution recognizes Taiwan as a territory of the wider, they call it the Republic of China, which includes the mainland. It is just a territory among the wider China. And of course, in reality, almost every country on earth recognizes Taiwan as part of the People's Republic of China, whose government is in Beijing. Even the United States recognizes that. And we'll go over that. But I want to show you some of the headlines that popped up this week regarding Taiwan. And again, as soon as this all got started with Ukraine, the US was already trying to expand it over to Taiwan. They want Taiwan to be to China what Ukraine is to Russia. And there, like I said, there's some major differences. Taiwan is literally part of China. It's not, there's no ambiguity here. So it's a little bit different, but it's the same ploy. It's the same ploy as finding a proxy that is willing to pursue Washington's interests at the cost of the territory that they're supposed to be administrating. So in this case, forget about Taiwan. The administration in Taiwan will lead everyone in Taiwan off a cliff, just like Zelensky did to Ukraine. So here's Taiwan scrambles jets to warn away Chinese planes in its air zone as tensions simmer. And they're talking about China flying. This is the air defense identification zone. It says right here, air defense identification zone. By definition, it has to be set up in international airspace, or it overlaps the airspace of another nation, because it's supposed to extend your own airspace so that you have enough time to identify a potentially hostile aircraft before it gets into your air defense. So this is not the same. First of all, Taiwan is not a country, it doesn't have its own airspace. But even if it did, China did not enter into what would be Taiwan's airspace. They entered into the air defense identification zone, which, by the way, extends over mainland China. So it's in Taiwan's case, it's completely ridiculous. But this is the lie you will see Reuters and everyone else repeat over and over again. Every time Chinese aircraft are flying in their own airspace or in international airspace, the West will collectively cry, oh, they're in Taiwan's airspace. They make it sound like these aircraft are like buzzing Taipei when it is nothing even remotely close to that. And so this is one of these manufactured fake stories that they're going to use to ratchet up tensions regarding China, to build up the hatred against China and to continue justifying America's belligerent posture toward China in Asia. Now, what should we do? Okay, let's just do some other stories from this week. So China threatens Taiwan with demise after Taipei lawmaker warns of missiles that can reach Beijing. This is very Ukraine-like. You know, Ukraine was making all of these threats against Russia before the military operation began, saying they're going to take back Crimea, they're going to take back the Donbas, maybe they're going to go get some nuclear weapons. They were making all of these absurd threats against Russia, and then they were surprised that Russia took them seriously, and now they're dismantling Ukraine. This is exactly the mentality that has infected the leadership in Taiwan. So they're threatening Beijing with these cruise missiles that they developed over the last couple of years. They're saying, you know, if China invades Taiwan will use these missiles on Beijing. Completely ridiculous. It would, and as the Chinese response noted, it'll just speed up Taiwan's demise all that much faster if they were to ever do that. So this is the kind of political climate taking shape around Taiwan. There was this. I don't know if people thought, Angela, did you get a chance to watch?
Yes, I did.
This is the Shangri-La Dialogue. Let me give a little background on the Shangri-La Dialogue. It is organized by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS. It is a British-based think tank, and they organize the Shangri-La Dialogue every year in Singapore since 2002. And so you can already see how this is shaping up to be primarily a Western-centric event, even though it's billed as Asia's premier security summit. And even though it's Asia's premier security summit, the first speech is always given by the US Secretary of Defense, this year, Secretary Lloyd Austin. And I don't know if you know this, but the United States is not located in Asia. It's not an Asian country. As a matter of fact, to get to Asia, it has to cross the entire Pacific. It's practically on the other side of the planet. Asia is practically on the other side of the planet from North America, where the US is actually located. And so the idea that this Asian Security Summit starts out with the US Secretary of Defense talking about America's vision for Asia, it just is throwing it in your face that this is about Western hegemony over the entire planet, including over Asia. So that was the first plenary meeting. There was also a session given to the defense minister of China, who completely gave a rebuttal on what Secretary Austin was talking about. Now, Angelo, what takeaways do you have? I mean, what were the kind of things that you heard Secretary Austin talking about that stood out to you?
Well, it's getting from the U.S. side, it's getting more and more aggressive. There's lots of talks that would have been unbelievable if it was 10, 15 years ago. Now, what they used to call strategic ambiguity, it's getting much and much stronger. So they want to make Taiwanese to be confident that the US and the West has their back, and this is very dangerous. You know, they're pushing Taiwanese to call for independence. So I don't know how much Taiwanese are believing to that, you know, and Taiwanese should just learn how many times the US has used a partner and just thrown away. Once there's no more use, we saw that in Vietnam, we saw that in Afghanistan, soon in Ukraine, many times they just use and discard. I just want to say one thing. When it comes, you see, you mentioned proxy war. If there is a war, a larger war in Europe, it's going to be European blood. There's 1.5 million soldiers in Europe, all combined. You know, from the NATO side, there's only 100,000 from the US. So it's going to be European blood in Europe on this front. If it's in Asia, it's going to be Asian blood. Why? Because there's two main army bases. It's South Korea and Japan. There's probably between the two of them close to 100,000 soldiers. But if they start an attack from those bases, well, you could imagine that China are going to hit those countries, and it's going to be, you know, a war within Asia, and it's going to be Korean, Japanese blood. So this is why they need to be extremely careful, those two countries. The US has no chance against China, zero chance when it comes to Taiwan. The big question mark is what is going to be the position of South Korea and Japan. It seems South Korea is trying to be more balanced. What worries me is Japan, especially since they want to change the constitution. Same as Germany is getting much more aggressive. They're changing their constitution, and they're pouring $100 billion program for 5 years. in the army. Well, the same, the Japanese are going to get more aggressive. So you see, they're not beaten, they're back. The Axis is back. Germany is back. It's just Nazi rebranded. It's rebranded. Now it's they have a flag of LGTB and so on, but they're still the same. And you see the aspiration that is coming back. Germany, they want Kaliningrad back. You see, I mean, it used to be German, and they want it back. Maybe, probably. Japan, they have problems with Russia on Kuril. It's Kuril Islands. It's still actually there's no peace treaty. They're still unsolved. So maybe Japan, what they want is actually get it back to Russia. So you see, those are all wars that are unfinished. And so what worries me is Japan. What is going to be the position of Japan? And I mean, so far they haven't allowed to have missiles, long-range missiles, to be put in Japan and Korea, but they would be very dangerous. So we have to see the escalation. But you see things that were not imaginable. Lithuania cutting the access to the Kaliningrad would have been unthinkable, because they have a treaty. They're breaking a treaty, long-time treaty with Russia. I think we can expect anything. Why? For the simple reason that many countries are not sovereign states. Is Japan really a sovereign state? It's not. It's been occupied since World War II. When you have 50,000 soldiers, foreign soldiers on your soil, and you have all those NGOs, NED, that actually can overthrow your government anytime, you're not a sovereign state. You don't have decisions on your foreign policy. And this is not the only example. Lithuania, they're not taking the decisions. Why are they going against their own interest? When it comes to China, they recognize, actually Lithuania recognized Taiwan. They're trying, it's the only country in Europe that is starting to recognize Taiwan. So it's a suicide, economic suicide. And then you go against your own neighbor, Russia. I mean, it's madness. What? So how can you explain that? People would not go against their own interest. It's because it's not a democracy. It's been hijacked by foreign power. And the same as Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine, they had ministers after 2014. They had ministers that in 24 hours they got Ukrainian passports, but they were foreigners, and they got them in. It's completely hijacked. Saakashvili, he was Georgian. He went to Odessa. He was named governor of Odessa. He was not Ukrainian. So you have many countries. We need to analyze. Are they hostage, and how much sovereignty they have, and they're not. We need to stop to call them allies, Western allies. They are hostages, and those people are hostages within their own country.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the Japanese Prime Minister gave the opening keynote address at this Shangri-La Dialogue. And you couldn't, I mean, it looked like he found Lloyd Austin's papers on the ground and he couldn't find his. He picked it up and he just read that instead, because everything he said was about promoting US hegemony over Asia and how Japan was going to be the little lackey doing it, and how they're going to use 2% of their GDP on defense spending. Japan needs to spend that money on their own people. And I want to show people this. Where did Japan export to in 2019? It looks like the US is their #1 export partner, but it's not true, because you have to always add China and Hong Kong and also Taiwan together. And as you can see, China is a much more significant export partner with Japan than even the United States. And then when you switch over to imports, it's very clearly China and Japan. So Japan's best interests are served by maintaining peace and stability between themselves and all of their neighbors in Asia, especially China. Could you imagine China and Japan openly working together, the way they would transform the region and the world? It would be unbelievable, and it would be unstoppable. But because, just as you said, Angelo, Japan does not have an independent foreign policy. Tens of thousands of US forces occupying their territory since the end of World War II ensures that it does not. They're going to adapt this adopt this ridiculous foreign policy that works constantly against the Japanese people's best interest. 2% of their GDP for military spending on confronting who? Your largest trade partner? It makes absolutely no sense. And this is the same process that the US has coerced Germany to go along with versus Russia, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This was going to benefit Russia and Germany and the rest of Europe. It would have brought the Russians and the Europeans closer together. There would be economic cooperation instead of any prospect of military confrontation. And the US deliberately sabotaged that and created the situation that we see now in Europe. They're doing the exact same thing to Japan and any other country they can work their way into the political system of, to turn against China, to isolate China, just like they're trying to isolate Russia from Europe. And they're doing it successfully because the governments in Europe capitulated. And that's thanks to the very structure of the European Union that had been subverting European sovereignty on an individual national basis. The same process isn't quite as viable here in Asia, but it's the same type of process. It's the same approach. And that's actually why Taiwan, let's talk about Taiwan a little bit here.
Can I add just one thing, Brian, about Japan? I think it's important to say that. I mean, just how history is manipulated and how actually you can change the perspective of people. If only Japanese, they knew about history. I'm just going to give you a few facts here. I mean, 2 nuclear bombs were put on Japan while the war was completely over. And this was actually to annihilate completely Japan, but actually to tell the world that they had nuclear weapons, and especially to tell the USSR they had nuclear weapons. So they killed hundreds of thousands of people for nothing. The war was over. This is one of the biggest crimes against humanity, but you won't see much Hollywood movies about this. Another thing is that Japanese should remember World War II. They gathered hundreds of thousands of Japanese in California. They were stripped of their belongings. They were put in concentration camps. They need to remember that. In the 80s, Japanese, they were actually surpassing the US. And what the US did was to kill the Japanese economy under the Plaza Accord. Back then, they were actually burning Japanese cars. They were smashing TVs. It was the same as you have anti-Russia, anti-China propaganda. You had this in Japan. I do remember myself. So we need to remember, like the Japanese, they should really learn about their history. And what saddens me is that the same as Japanese, the same as Taiwanese, you have new generation that don't have the background. And they are educated where they learn history through Hollywood, and they learn history through books. They're actually, where the history is being rewritten. When you take a book in Taiwan, right now, it's a completely different story that is told into books. And it takes only one generation. So what we experienced in Hong Kong was one generation brainwashed, and they were told, oh, they're not Chinese, because they had colonial era books. The same in Japan. They're being taught that, oh, you belong to the West. The same as Taiwanese. Now you have a Taiwanese president that she says on TV, all Western values. And I want to say to Taiwan, but look at yourself in the mirror. You are denying your ancestors. And what they should be really careful is that, a Taiwanese abroad in World War II will be seen like a Chinese. Any actually Asian will be seen as Asian. It's going to be ethnic at the end. And even people, even if they have US passport and they look Asian, you know what? It doesn't matter. You are Asian. So they need to be extremely careful, because ultimately, it's going to be ethnical. And what we see in Russophobia, it is nothing compared to what will come to Chinese and Asian. And that's what worries me a lot. So Japanese, just be careful, really. You're siding with the devil, and you are going to do a suicide. It's going to be monumental. And again, what saddens me is that it's going to be Asian blood, not US blood. You see, the shores of the US are far away. So what they can do is pour in money. They pour $50 billion into Ukraine. It's like, oh, it's okay. Why? Because this is a generation that, this generation cosmopolitan generation. They don't want to get killed. The closest they get to war is Hollywood movies of World War II. That's all they do. Afghanistan or PlayStation. But those ones, they don't have the connections that Russia has to war. 27 million Russians died. Now we're poking the bear right now. In Russia, they know their history. In every single family in Russia, they lost people. In the US, you know what? This woke generation, they have no clue. They have no clue about what is war. Why? Because the last war you had in the US was the Civil War. They don't have any clue. And the only connections they have with war is extremely remote and tangible. It's Hollywood.
I just saw in the comments someone saying, what's wrong with China and the US just leaving the status quo? Well, the status quo for Taiwan is eventual complete integration with mainland China. I want to show people this regarding the economy of Taiwan. Where did Taiwan export to? I mean, it's part of the mainland Chinese economy. It's already being integrated economically, and everything about so I mean, like the idea of Taiwan independence, all China has to do is just cut them off economically, and it's gone. Their economy disappears. They don't have an economy, and then you have to ask yourself, well, how some people will say, but people in Taiwan, they want to be independent. How can you argue against that? Because they don't want it. This idea has been put into their head. This idea is put into their head. It was something that the West had been investing in since the Civil War ended badly for them, and they were hiding on Taiwan. And then this is the Democracy Digest. It's the newspaper of the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy, and they go over how the Sunflower Movement in Taiwan in 2014 was going on at the same time as the U.S. sponsored mobs in Hong Kong. They were directly linked together, and how all of these people leading the Sunflower Movement actually ended up in the government of Taiwan. If you go to the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, it is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy. That's Carl Gershman with the president of Taiwan, and there was also this Damon Wilson, the new president of the NED this year in Taiwan. The government is run by the United States government through the National Endowment for Democracy, all of that money being pumped into the political system of Taiwan to convince them to adopt this independence agenda. It is not born out of the best interests of the people actually living in Taiwan. Obviously, it's not. It's exactly what they did to Ukraine. They convinced Ukraine that their best interests were served by hating Russia, transforming Russia into a deadly enemy. And look at how that's working out for Ukraine right now. That is exactly what they're doing to Taiwan. The exact same process, dumping millions, if not billions of dollars into Taiwan's political system to co-opt it and to put this idea into the heads of the people living there. That's why when you say, let's take a poll, let's look at an election, it doesn't necessarily give you an accurate idea of what is in the best interest of people. You can convince people to adopt an agenda that is completely contrary to their best interest. They did it to Ukraine. They're doing it to Taiwan. And so this is what they're doing. So you saw the economic numbers, and now you see the U.S. sitting there in Taiwan, running the government, essentially putting these people, handpicking them, putting them into power, and then running them down this trail toward inevitable war with the mainland, which is going to completely destroy Taiwan. I want to see someone who's pro-Taiwan independence explain to me how step-by-step this works out in Taiwan's favor. I've never seen anyone articulate a coherent explanation as how that. Angelo, can you imagine a scenario where somehow that independence works out for Taiwan?
No, but I like what you just said before. Extremely important. Who planted the idea? Important. Who planted the idea? Just to give you an idea, I mean, I'm going to draw a parallel between Ukraine and Taiwan. Ukraine, they kicked out all the Russian media. They did exactly the same in Taiwan. So now you have only one voice. So what people, if you open a media in Taiwan, it's going to be, there's nothing pro-Chinese. So you have only one voice now. Probably 90% of the media in Taiwan are siding more for pro-independence. So additional to that, you have the history books, you have all this brainwashing, you have those NGOs pouring a lot of money. Now you look at the demographic of Taiwan, who's pro-independence, who's against. And actually, but by the way, 90% of Taiwanese, they are for the status quo. It depends how you ask the question. But if they are pro-independence, they actually side pro-independence, but status quo, because they know you claim independence, overnight it's going to be war. Okay, so extremely important, who planted the idea? And it takes one generation. So demographic in Taiwan, it's the young people. They are for pro-independence. Same as in Hong Kong. Who do you think they were in the streets during the 2019 attempt of color revolution? They were kids. You know, kids with no foundation. Hollywood, history books changed. And you tell them, oh, go out because you are going to lose your freedom. It's like, you know, and when Hong Kong, in Fraser Institute ranked Hong Kong third in the world in individual freedoms. And kids in Hong Kong, they were in the street like, I want my freedom. You know, well, you know, this is how you do it. So you co-opt, you get into like the minds of young people. And this is how they managed to have the Sunflower Revolution in 2014. Remember that there was an agreement very similar to Ukraine. In Ukraine, they were trying to have an agreement either with the EU or with Russia in 2014. Same year in Taiwan, Taiwan was actually talking about a bilateral agreement with the mainland for commerce, you know, like a free trade agreement. And this was actually a unification, de facto unification, economical unification between the two sides. You know, how beneficial is that for both economies? You know, it's an integration. It's peaceful, you know. They made sure the US poured lots of money through NED to have this color revolution in 2014. And then you got the DPP, which is completely hijacked by the US, this party of Taiwan. And since then, it's been completely reversed. And for what's the benefit of Taiwan? Zero. You know, it's not. Now you have Taiwan, which has only 2 more years to go after the second round, you know. So she has to step down in 2 years. So the US and the West has only 2 years of window of opportunity. After that, probably the Kuomintang will take over, I believe. And it will be over. Once the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, takes power, it will be over.
Yeah, I want to point out comments like this. There is more to Taiwanese against China than the youth. They have a history. Okay, that's true. They have a history. And when the US dumps millions or billions of dollars into their political system, that history becomes exaggerated. They lost a civil war. Yeah, they lost a civil war and they were hiding in Taiwan, China at that time. Just like with Hong Kong, they did not have the ability to stand up for and preserve their sovereignty and their territorial integrity. Today, they do, and they will. And so this whole argument is moot. The people still clinging to Taiwanese independence are brainwashed by the United States. They're talking about independence. They don't have independence from the United States. Everything running through their mind is a function of their subordination to Washington and Washington's foreign policy agenda. So what are they talking about? Independence. What a joke. And even the United States, though, despite all of their propaganda and their claims publicly, on the U.S. State Department's own official website, they say they do not recognize Taiwan's independence. Let's see. Let's get the actual independent. We do not support Taiwan independence. So if Taiwan is not independent, that means it's dependent on someone. Who are they dependent on? They're dependent on mainland China, the People's Republic of China, and the Communist Party of China. That's who. And so it's already settled. There's no question here. The U.S. continues making it a question because it's expedient for their foreign policy objectives. And that is the only reason they keep this going, because they are trying to create a flashpoint against China as a way of containing China. That's the only reason they're doing this. Even when you look at the State Department's own website, you see how irrational their own argument is. Why are you sending weapons to Taiwan if you acknowledge that it's not an independent state? It's part of China, and Beijing told you not to. Why are you doing that? You're doing it to provoke a conflict, just like the US did in Ukraine. Ukraine's best interests were served by maintaining ties with Russia and Europe and the United States at the same time. And the US put an end to that. That was not in their best interest, even if they convinced the people in the streets or the people going to the polls that that was their best interest. It clearly wasn't. And the same goes for Taiwan. It's the same exact product. It's so obvious that this is what's happening. It's painful to see people trying to argue, they're not independent. If the U.S. money going into the current government in Taiwan, if that was all cut, this would evaporate overnight. That's how artificial it is, and that's how what a lack of independence this independence movement actually has. Same for the mob in Hong Kong. They all said they wanted independence too. They would not have existed for a week without U.S. money flowing into their bank accounts. It's just it's so obvious.
I'd like to use a quote here. You know, Gengis Khan used to say, "Never fight a war you cannot win." I mean, Zelensky, I mean, you were going against Russia. You knew you couldn't win. Everybody could tell, you couldn't win against Russia. It did. Same as in Taiwan. Even if, let's say they want to go against China and so on, just be rational. Even that, you're going to lose. Why would you do that? You're going to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people for what? At least if you had, more probability to win or whatever, but there's no way that they could win against China. And actually, they did some games, simulations. I don't know how many times, but the US did on attacking China, and they lost every time. And every single day that passes, China is getting stronger. There's a air carrier that just came out. I think it's the Tianjin. I'm not sure about the name, but it's every day they're going faster and faster, and they have a very strong defensive counter power projection army, and there's no way. The only thing they might be able to do is contain China, hurt the economy. Yes, probably they will hurt the economy, and that's what they're trying to aim. They will destroy. There will be lots of deaths, and it's going to be Asian deaths, but then ultimately it's about the wallets. They want, they want maybe a reset, and what they will do is actually take over all the bonds, the debt. China has lent $1 trillion to the US, because of the trade balance. It's beneficiary for China, and this is a debt that is not meant to be repaid. So the same as they stole the money to Russians, they took their sovereign funds. They will do the same with China, and this is the end. This is the end. And it's not going to be reliable anymore. And I wouldn't be surprised that many governments around the world, they saw what they did to Russia, and they're actually taking out their money that is invested in sovereign bonds, because ultimately, whenever we are buying US bonds, we actually, paying for the standard of living for Americans, and it's not meant to be repaid. So it's a Ponzi scheme, and this is why, this is the core of the war, because many countries and the global south, the BRICS, they don't want to play into this. They're working hard, they're being spoiled their resources, and they're financing the Western lifestyle, lavish lifestyle, and they're not being paid back, because they're being paid by money which is only paper. It's not backed by anything.
Yeah, and again, I just want to point out that let's get back to Secretary Austin and his speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And it doesn't matter if it was there or Secretary of State Antony Blinken It's the same story over and over again. It doesn't even matter what administration. It has always been about encircling and containing China and the overall U.S. agenda of stopping any peer or near peer competitor. That's what it's always been about. That's why.
Oh, I don't know if we're still live. I'm being cut. I think I might be alone live.
Yes.
Are you?
If I come back, let me know.
No. I'm good. I can hear you now. But I was just on my own for a few seconds. Are you back?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay, so maybe I have a problem with my internet. If I disappear, just go on a little bit.
I'll do the closing. But anyway, we're getting towards the end. Maybe we can wrap up before it shuts down.
Okay, so I just want to point out that this is all about containing China. The whole situation over Taiwan it's a repeat of what they've done to Ukraine. They have hijacked these people. What is in Taiwan's best interest? Its best interest is to cut this out and to reintegrate with the rest of China and put an end to this. It's a loose shingle on a rooftop that could blow the whole roof off. And just as you were saying, Angelo, the goal is maybe not to defeat China militarily, but to destroy its economy. They have said that in their policy papers. So it's yet another trap. They're using propaganda to try to get the public to go along with this, to see China as the bad guy, when in reality, all China's doing is defending its territorial integrity. Secretary Austin at the Shangri-La Dialogue kept talking about territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and how the U.S. is going to protect it. And at the same time, they are at the center of the biggest violation of national sovereignty in Asia, funneling weapons to Taiwan, putting U.S. troops onto Taiwan, violating China's sovereignty over Taiwan, even when the U.S. State Department itself admits it recognizes China's sovereignty over Taiwan. It is a blatant provocation, and I just want to set the record so people understand that, yes, this is the U.S. doing it yet again. They did Ukraine versus Russia. They're doing Taiwan versus China. We need to keep a close eye on all this. People need to be a little smarter, just see through it. They're going to try to prey on your prejudices against China because they know you know nothing about it. They're going to prey on that ignorance and try to get you, if you're not supporting their agenda in Ukraine against Russia, at least they can get you to support their agenda against China in Taiwan. Don't fall for it. I want to thank Angelo for taking time out of his day to join us. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Please hit like, it helps. You know, it helps the algorithm on YouTube. Check the video description below for where you can find and follow my work and also Angelo's work. Angelo's doing a lot of videos over on his channel. Check it out. I'm still in the process of getting back to 100%. I'll at least do 2 or 3 videos a week, including this live stream. So again, thank you, and we'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.